Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have taken place around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Greece on the brink as it becomes the first developed country to go into arrears with the IMF. The world's biggest bailout of a sovereign state comes to an end. Persisting possibilities of Greece's exit from the Eurozone sends out shockwaves. Question marks emerge on the future of European integration. Islamic State militants unleash more havoc in the Middle East as part of their Ramzan offensive. Expansion in Afghanistan rings alarm bells for the subcontinent. More than 140 bodies recovered after an Indonesian Air Force plane crashes into a residential area soon after takeoff. Health of Indonesia's aging military fleet under scrutiny. And Taiwan government probes fire at an amusement park that injured nearly 500 people, mostly youth. More than 200 of those injured still under intensive care. Well, Greece became the first developed country and EU nation to default on its creditors. It defaulted on a 1.5 billion euro payment to the IMF this week. At the same time, the world's biggest bailout of a sovereign state came to a bitter end, leaving Greece alone, insolvent and on course for a possible exit from the Eurozone. Here's a report.
Greek citizens felt it hard on Monday morning. Banks shut, capital controls implemented. Saving liquidity was the theme as the country stared at default and the end of bailouts by the European Union. Withdrawals were curtailed for the entire week, less money for people to spend and invest in business. The already weak economy lurched towards deep recession.
Είναι λυπηρόν, αλλά καλά μας κάνουνε, γιατί φταίμε εμείς.
The entire business world in Greece today is practically frozen, okay? There is no exchange being done in commerce or in trade or whatever. We are unable to buy or to sell something that may cost 10 euros, okay? Now, companies like this one or other type of companies will work for about 1 week or 2 weeks. Then we'll run out of cash.
The same day, global stock markets reacted with shock. In the US, Asia and Europe, stocks fell as worries spread of possible broader harm to the global financial system, though fears on that wider impact petered out. By the evening of the 30th, as the deadline neared, the writing was on the wall. Greece would become the first developed nation to default on an IMF loan with no immediate bailout. EU nations said, however, that the doors remain open. On Wednesday, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras put new proposals to the Eurozone with a partial agreeing to measures. In exchange for conditional acceptance, he asked for a 29 billion euro loan to cover all debt service payments due in the next 2 years.
Είμαστε διατεθειμένοι να αποδεχτούμε και σκληρά μέτρα, τα έχουμε προτείνει άλλωστε, εφόσον το πλαίσιο μέσα στο οποίο θα ενταχθούν θα είναι βιώσιμο όσο αφορά το χρέος, όσο αφορά το αναπτυξιακό κομμάτι, για να μπορέσει να αποδηγιωθεί η Ελλάδα και το Brexit να φύγει από τη μέση. Καλώς. Να μην ξέρουμε ότι σε μερικούς μήνες θα είμαστε στο ίδιο.
Even if a bailout plan is worked out, Greece's uphill climb is far from over. Treasury bills worth 2 billion euros are to be repaid by the 10th of July. Bonds worth 3.5 billion euros are to be repaid to the Eurozone partners by the 20th. By the 20th of August, it has to repay loans worth 3.3 billion euros. 5 months of deadlocked talks have given way to a slanging match, with all parties now scrambling to deflect the blame for a catastrophic failure that has eroded the Eurozone's credibility and shattered the myth of the single currency's irreversibility. Greece's critical referendum on Sunday only offers a horror choice between more brutal austerity and a leap into the unknown. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, all eyes are now on a referendum from the Greek people on Sunday, a vote on whether or not they accept European Union financial aid under the austerity conditions requested by the country's lenders. Hectic campaigning took off around Greece days before this key referendum. Both the government pushing for the no vote and supporters of the option to say yes to the European Union conditions made efforts to convince undecided voters. Besides Greece itself, the decision is also critical to the future of its Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, who is pushing for a no vote. If Tsipras loses the referendum, then he will have lost his political authority too. There will be pressure on him to resign. If he wins, then he will return to Europe's leaders and say that he has a fresh mandate from the Greek people. Tsipras said that he expected to clinch a new deal with the creditors 24 hours after the referendum. The EU has said that it would continue talks on a bailout only after the referendum.
I think that, a major decision was made last Friday to interrupt the negotiations on the part of Greece when it decided to launch a referendum this coming Sunday. I think there is a democratic process that is underway, and that should result in hopefully more clarity, less uncertainty as to what is the determination of the Greek people and what is the authority of the government.
Well, the seemingly endless dispute between Greece and its creditors has been one of sharply conflicting narratives. Creditors speak of reforms where Greeks see only savage austerity. When the former Troika calls for compromise, Greeks understand humiliation. Greece's expulsion from the Eurozone, termed the Grexit, potentially holds massive setbacks for the Greek economy, besides huge repercussions for the European Union itself and the fallout on other global economies.
The Bank of Greece has painted a very bleak picture of what Grexit might mean: a deep recession with soaring unemployment and slumping incomes. Ordinary Greeks would find their savings devalued. Greece would find itself an outcast on international credit markets, making a swift recovery even more unlikely. The Greek government could be forced to issue a new drachma currency to prevent a banking collapse. Greece has a history of coups, and there are fears that leaving the euro could prove politically debilitating. For anti-EU parties such as France's National Front or Britain's UKIP, the crisis strengthens their argument that European integration is ultimately doomed. A Greek exit would change how the common currency project is seen. Corporate treasurers and wealthy individuals will wonder if their money is safe in the banks of other weaker Eurozone economies. The first rupture of Europe's currency union throws open chances of an irreversible domino effect. Countries like Ireland and Portugal, previous recipients of bailout money, could be dragged back into the crisis. Eurozone membership would no longer be seen as irrevocable and may prove a green light for the markets to attack weaker members of the currency grouping. The economic crisis in Greece may trigger capital outflows from India. Engineering exports may be impacted as European Union is the largest destination for such shipments. The rupee might depreciate. The RBI governor insists, however, that robust forex reserve will cushion the impact. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, we'll slip into a short break now, but still to come. Negotiators at the Iran nuclear deal talks say that they are closer than ever to a landmark agreement. The deadline has been extended by a week. We'll have that and more after the short break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the Islamic State's senselessly chaotic and gruesomely violent agenda shows no sign of abating as the terror group continues its stepped-up offensive in the holy month of Ramadan. In the backdrop of the three-pronged attacks in Tunisia, Kuwait and France, the Islamic State unleashed more grisly horrors besides expansionist aggression in the Middle East and Afghanistan. Here's more.
One year now since Islamic State chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared what he called a caliphate in captured parts of Syria and Iraq. 1 year too since US President Barack Obama announced a coalition of nations that he pledged would degrade and destroy the IS. Thus far, the Islamic State has overcome, not merely as a localized insurgency, but an aspiring proto-state hell-bent on taking and holding territory. A look at areas under IS control show up this expansionist ambition. Large swaths of East Syria and Western Iraq are already in their control amid intensive fighting for control in Kobani in Syria and Baiji in Iraq. Eastwards, the IS has made inroads into Afghanistan's Nangarhar province, fighting the Taliban there, posing a threat to the subcontinent. Attacks targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen through terror attacks and fighting the Hamas in Gaza, the militants wreak havoc. In North Africa, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, even parts of Europe have felt their brand of terror. On Friday, June 26th, more than 60 people were killed and hundreds injured in three-pronged Islamic State terror attacks in Tunisia, Kuwait and France. A response to the group's call for stepped-up killings during the holy month of Ramadan. In Tunisia, British tourists were the worst hit, nearly 30 of the 38 killed, giving rise to a fresh wave of condemnation and calls for counter-action.
This is not the war between Islam and the West, which ISIL want people to believe. It is a generational struggle between a minority of extremists who want hatred to flourish and the rest of us who want freedom to prosper. And together we will prevail.
This 24-year-old had turned killer at Tunisia's beach resort, shooting dead tourists. His friends know him only as the average boy next door. Saif Rezgoui's story is a reflection enough of the IS brainwash machinery at work in the UK, Australia and many other countries. Memorials and condolences to victims come on the back of additional forces against the menace. There's the realization that this enemy calls for an entirely new approach.
We are very clear that the terrorists will not win. We will be united in working together to defeat them, but united also in working to defend our values.
La lutte contre le terrorisme implique que chaque pays s'adapte chaque jour et que nous renforcions chaque jour aussi ensemble nos dispositifs de coopération. C'est aussi le sens de la visite d'aujourd'hui.
A near-complete collapse of civil life in East Syria and Western Iraq, the center of the so-called caliphate, is signature enough of what the IS is actually about, even as it holds up a banner of brutal inhumanity through a string of grisly murders. Among the latest, the beheading of 2 civilian women in Syria, blaming them of sorcery. Fundamentalist goriness at its worst, and as the British Prime Minister put it, well outside claims of any religion. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, joining me for a chat this week to talk about this is Reazaul Hasan of the Hindustan Times. Welcome, Reazaul, and thank you for joining me on the program. You know, it's not just the United States who are celebrating an anniversary this weekend. It is the Islamic State too that is celebrating an anniversary, that of forming a caliphate. Now, what has happened over the last 1 year is that, you know, on July 3rd, 2014, the Pentagon dismissed the Islamic State, or then ISIL, saying that they are not going to make any kind of an impact on the world. But now we've seen that they have shown that they mean business.
Well, you know, it's very similar to what happened just after the 9/11 attacks. That at that time, everyone was talking about Al-Qaeda. If you look at what's happening now with all the terror attacks, like the ones in France, Tunisia, and Kuwait, it's very clear that ISIL today, or ISIS, or IS, as you would like to call them, is clearly the biggest brand as far as global terrorism is concerned. It's an organization that has shown that it's not restricted only to Iraq and Syria, that it can strike in major Western countries, and it can strike virtually at will. So, I mean, it's clear that the Pentagon got it wrong. It's clear that most of the world powers got it wrong. And this is something that is becoming a huge issue, not just for the world, but even for our region.
Indeed, it is becoming a problem for our region as well, because they have reached Afghanistan and it's not too long before they reach our doorstep. So how much of a threat does the Islamic State really pose to India?
Well, you know, I think you have to look at first the intention. I mean, it's not just Afghanistan. They have formed, you know, a new unit which is basically for Khorasan, which is, you know, it covers the entire Afghanistan, Pakistan, India region. And it's very clear that there are a serious threat in Afghanistan, because recently you had the Afghan Taliban taking the very unusual step of writing a letter to al-Baghdadi saying that you should keep out of Afghanistan. So it's very clear that even the Afghan Taliban are rattled by the IS, and they know that, you know, they pose a threat to even the Taliban. And there have been numerous reports of disenchanted Afghan Taliban commanders switching sides and going over to IS. And there have been a lot of clashes which have claimed a lot of lives in Afghanistan, clashes between IS and Taliban. So it's very, very clear. And, you know, given the fact that Afghanistan is a very muddled country right now, I mean, we have a government which is clearly not in control. We have the foreign troops pulling out and the Afghan troops fighting the Taliban and other militants on their own for the first time. So it's very clearly, and also not forgetting the fact that we have a neighbor on our west who constantly meddles in Afghanistan, who has had a long history of, you know, using militant groups as proxy forces. So it becomes a very disturbing kind of a scenario as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and if ISIL is able to make you know, inroads into Afghanistan.
Another alarming fact is is how several organizations around the world are joining the ranks of Islamic State. You know, we've seen Boko Haram now, you know, waving the Islamic State flag, and they're calling themselves the African wing of Islamic State, and they too are creating quite a bit, or wreaking havoc there in Africa as well. So that's also extremely alarming, isn't it?
It's a very clear and present threat. I mean, you know, if you look back in the old days, again, I'd like to go back. I mean, in the old days, just after the 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda was a top brand name. Everyone tried to get aligned to it, or, you know, there were efforts to kind of invoke Al-Qaeda's name. So it's very clear that any Islamic terrorist group would now look up to the IS. Also, you know, the other factor that is very worrying is the way IS has used social media and the internet to recruit. And that was also the way some Indian youngsters were recruited from Maharashtra. So that is a very, very clear and present danger. I mean, this is something that our security planners will have to look at, the possibility of the IS infiltrating, you know, I mean, recruiting from India via
But is it a war against the West, or is it a war against India too?
I think it's a war against any open democratic society. It's not just the West or the East or India. I mean, ISIL is a group that wants to impose its own brand of what it calls Sharia. I mean, even that is not real Islamic law, but it wants to, you know, impose this sort of almost medieval kind of regime in open democratic societies. And that is why it is a threat to India.
Indeed, indeed. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much, Reazaul Hasan, for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us and sharing your expert views on this very subject. Well, on that note, of course, let's take a look now at some big headline stories around the world this week in our Globe Watch.
141 bodies have been recovered after an Indonesian Air Force transport plane crashed in a residential area of Medan in Sumatra Island in Indonesia on Tuesday. All 122 people on board the Hercules C-130 were killed besides 19 people on the ground when the plane hit houses and a hotel before bursting into flames. The plane carrying military personnel, their families and students crashed soon after takeoff. The incident has put the health of the Southeast Asian nation's military aircraft under scrutiny. The United States and Cuba have struck a deal to open embassies in each other's capitals and re-establish diplomatic relations for the first time in half a century. On Wednesday, US President Barack Obama said both countries had shared interests in the fight against terror and disaster response but had serious differences on issues like free speech. As per government statements on both sides, both embassies are likely to be opened around July 20th. In December, Obama had announced that the US was ending an outdated approach of isolating Cuba. In May, the US dropped Cuba from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Yukiya Amano was in Tehran on Thursday to discuss monitoring sensitive nuclear sites with senior officials as major powers and Iran seeking a breakthrough in forging a lasting nuclear agreement. Earlier in the week, Iran and world powers gave themselves an extra week to reach an accord, curbing Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief, extending the deadline to July 7th. Access for UN nuclear inspectors to the Iranian military sites is a major sticking point to the agreement.
While investigations are on into the horrific water park catastrophe in Taiwanese capital Taipei last Saturday, more than 200 of some 500 people who were injured in a blaze at a stage show at the park are said to be in a critical condition. As park authorities issued an apology and assured medical help to the injured, police has recommended criminal charges against the organizers of the party where the fire broke out. Here's more.
June 26th, a Saturday evening. 1 minute it was revelry and entertainment and party, and the next a hurtling towards mayhem and catastrophe. Balls of fire tearing into the young crowd. Alarm, unnerved, terrified, horror and panic as the flames engulfed the gathering of nearly 800.
突然就爆炸嘛，然后就是你看到的人都在跑，然后每个人都想把每个往后拉，
很多人都皮都不见了，然后都受伤，
地狱一样嘛。
The next few hours saw emergency efforts, flooded hospitals and intensive care units, a fight against massive burn injuries, and a dark night ahead. Investigators are focusing on the possibility that a cigarette butt or spark caused the blaze when colored powder that was sprayed from the stage caught fire. The scale of the tragedy rattled the administration. Taiwan President Ma Ying-jeou assured a thorough investigation. The Taipei mayor announced a ban on use of inflammable powders at public events alongside efforts to step up overall safety standards. Investigations are also underway at the Formosa Fun Coast Park where the incident happened, with police recommending criminal charges against the party organizers. The park has set up a $3.2 million fund to help the injured with treatment. As they issued an apology, the owners insist they cannot be blamed completely.
可是真的没有想到，一个出租场地，就像你出租一个房子给人家，你怎么会知道说会造成这么多人的受伤？真的是非常的难过，所以真对不起。
But there's no denying the numbers involved. 498 injured, mostly youth. 202 being treated for severe burn injuries in 43 hospitals. For hundreds, victims, witnesses, friends, family, the last week has just been about coming to terms with the shock, even beyond the treatment.
小孩子高高兴兴出去，躺在医院里面死了，拜托，对不起。
The catastrophe forces a rethink on security against such incidents at the growing number of amusement parks worldwide that have an ever-growing clientele. Lessons have to be learned and decimated fast. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
As Shift Focus now, it's time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week. Here's our sports action. Two-time Wimbledon champion Rafael Nadal made an early exit for the fourth year in a row as he was outplayed by qualifier Dustin Brown on centre court. Germany's world number 102 won 7-5, 3-6, 6-4, 6-4 to reach the third round of a Grand Slam for the third time. Nadal has now lost in the second, first, fourth and second rounds on his past 4 visits to Wimbledon. On each occasion, the 14-time Grand Slam champion was beaten by a player outside the world's top 100. The most anticipated cycling event of the year, the Tour de France, kick-started on Saturday, and after 5 years, the peloton returned to the Netherlands for the prologue in Utrecht. This year's Tour is widely tipped to see a 4-way battle between Chris Froome, Alberto Contador, Nairo Quintana and Vincenzo Nibali for the yellow jersey. Their individual ability will be tested to the limits, but their respective teams will also be severely challenged in 3 areas in particular: the mountains, the cobbled 4th stage and the team time trial on stage 9. The 3-week-long Grand Tour will come to an end on the 26th of July at the Champs-Élysées. Danny Blind was appointed the new Netherlands head coach on Wednesday. The 53-year-old succeeds Guus Hiddink, who left his position on Monday after just 10 months in charge. Blind, who was Hiddink's assistant, won 42 caps during a 20-year playing career with Ajax and Sparta Rotterdam, and also managed Ajax. Hiddink lost 5 and won 4 of his 10 matches during his second spell in charge of the team. The Dutch finished third in their Euro 2016 qualifying group. And finally, the US declaring gay marriages legal has come as a fillip for LGBT communities in other countries too, pushing for similar rights. We'll leave you with Madrid's traditional gay pride high heels race this week, in which dozens of costumed men took part. See you again next time. Bye-bye.